We've deployed satellite constellations, developed VR technologies for Disney. We're very passionate about deep tech, and we see robotics as the future of front-end labor. And our goal is to incubate that in a location, in a place where it can get the most TLC. We originally started the company in California, but we moved to Minnesota a few months ago. Really affordable to build robots in the United States here in Minnesota. There are a lot of contract manufacturers here with the right expertise. There are other companies building robots here. It is going to be the hotbed for robot manufacturing. The reason is, if you can build Skippies, our robots, to work in the Minnesota weather and geography, they can work anywhere.
Now, when you hire someone with a disability, you've immediately led by example. You've said you trust a new perspective, that you're confident in that person, in yourself, and your team. Now, I work with a theater company, and we have signs on the wall that say, "Work your quirk," and radical inclusion. They emphasize that what makes us different gives us strength, a new perspective, a creative edge. In Cajun cooking, there's an ingredient called the lagniappe, and it's that little something something that keeps you coming back. Hire somebody with a disability. It's the lagniappe thing to do.
So, you've decided to start your own business. You have the resources to sell or the services your new customers need. So what's next? Here's a simple checklist to help you get started. First, choose your business structure. Do you want a sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability company, or corporation? Each form has tax and financial consequences. Next, check to make sure the name you want to use for your business is available. You can do this by checking with the Minnesota Secretary of State office. If you want to be a sole proprietor, all you have to do is register the business name with the Secretary of State office. Or if your business is going to be an LLC or a corporation, when you file the business structure registration with the Secretary of State's office, that registration also includes the business name. After that, you may need to obtain federal and state tax identification numbers from the Internal Revenue Service and the Minnesota Department of Revenue. Note that some businesses won't need to take this step. Need is determined by the number of business owners, if the business will have employees, and if the business makes taxable sales or provides taxable services. Next, obtain any necessary licenses and permits from state and local government. Then you will need to buy or rent space for the business and set up phone and internet service. You will also want to start a banking and credit relationship with a bank or other financial institution. And don't forget to write a business plan with benchmarks to guide you through business growth. We can help you.
And remember, if you need help on any of these steps, please reach out to us here at the Small Business Assistance Office. We have staff available to answer your questions.
My name is John Houck. I am president of LightRun Incorporated. LightRun manufactures and sells a specialized unweighting tool for survivors of stroke, traumatic brain injury, and other injuries. I started out my career working for a company called Cardiac Pacemakers, then later on St. Jude Medical, along with a couple of startups in between. So I came out of the cardiac world, and Minnesota has been a great place for a medical device career. Our product has been sold and is currently being used in Hennepin County Medical Center, the VA Hospital in Minneapolis, North Memorial Hospital, and we're soon going to be delivering a system to Courage Kenny. So we are getting local traction in spite of the pandemic, and our goal is to go nationwide in 2022 and beyond.
Well, I met Andrew in 2010. He was a recent graduate from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So he already had his education before he came to us. And he was looking for work as an architect.
And I applied for over 200 jobs all over the U.S. I applied for jobs in Hawaii, New York, Florida, and didn't get any sort of response. And after I'd applied for all of those different jobs, I realized that the job market right now is really low. and that I was facing discrimination, as were a lot of people with disabilities.
So he's deaf, and the world is hearing. And so, of course, the biggest barrier for him was communication. He worked with MCIL on job interviewing skills. And he did a very nice job talking about his experience and his work qualifications, but he did struggle a little bit with the accommodation issue, and so we worked a little bit more on that.
It was my good fortune to meet Andrew back in 2007, 2008. Andrew was someone who was deaf, and he had graduated from architectural school. Really, my charge was, how can I help Andrew network, take smaller steps given what the economy was?
He really advocated in my job search. He wants people to get out there. He connected me with people in the field because that's what I needed. He reached out to MnDOT, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, in the Affirmative Action Office. He contacted Lynette Geschwind. She was the head of the Affirmative Action Office at MnDOT. And she was able to set up a contract job for me to inspect airport terminals. It was a fascinating job, but again, it was contract work. And they actually didn't seem to see me as a person with disabilities. Based on my resume, they said via email that they were just really impressed with my experience, and they wanted to give me a chance.
When we launched Andrew, we were not focused on his disability. We helped him develop the skills to market himself as an architect. No one with a disability gets a job because of their disability. It's all about skills, and Andrew's a perfect example of someone that took what we helped him learn and was able to independently get a job in the private sector.
Do you run a small business in Minnesota? Are you trying to expand your operations? Or need help adjusting to changes brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic? Then contact your local Small Business Development Center.
We'd like you to know that whether you're starting a brand new business, growing an existing one, or if your business needs help because of the COVID pandemic, the SBDC can provide that help, and it won't cost you a penny.
These are hard times, but if you need help with your business, Small Business Development Centers have real professionals standing by, ready to help you develop your business plan, do marketing and research, set up your accounting, gain access to capital, and much more. And they do it all for free. So contact us today at mnsbdc.com.
In Minnesota, we're training our workforce for the next chapter of the global economy.
Can't wait to get started on this project.
It's great hands-on practice.
I think our students will love it.
I'll bring this to the robotics lab.
Our education and business climate are among the best in the nation. And they work together to grow creative, high-skilled talent.
The possibilities are almost endless.
We're a state that works hard, boasting one of the highest participation rates in America's workforce.
Awesome, man. This looks great. We can really do anything here.
Great things are happening in Minnesota, and we can help you thrive.
Final touch, man. Checkmate.
Join us.
Hey, my name is Amoga, co-founder and CEO of Carbon Origins. We're a robotics and VR company on a mission to make robots commonplace. So we're a group of scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs. We have landed robots on Mars, we've launched suborbital rockets, We've deployed satellite constellations, developed VR technologies for Disney, and we're very passionate about deep tech, and we see robotics as the future of front-end labor. And our goal is to incubate that in a location, in a place where it can get the most TLC. We originally started the company in California, but we moved to Minnesota a few months ago. Really affordable to build robots in the United States here in Minnesota. There are a lot of contract manufacturers here with the right expertise. There are other companies building robots here. It is going to be the hotbed for robot manufacturing. The reason is, if you can build Skippies, our robots, to work in the Minnesota weather and geography, they can work anywhere.
Now, when you hire someone with a disability, you've immediately led by example. You've said you trust a new perspective, that you're confident in that person, in yourself, and your team. Now, I work with a theater company, and we have signs on the wall that say, "Work your quirk," and radical inclusion. They emphasize that what makes us different gives us strength, a new perspective, a creative edge. In Cajun cooking, there's an ingredient called the lagniappe. And it's that little something, something that keeps you coming back. Hire somebody with a disability. It's the lagniappe thing to do.
So, you've decided to start your own business. You have the resources to sell or the services your new customers need. So what's next? Here's a simple checklist to help you get started. First, choose your business structure. Do you want a sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability company, or corporation? Each form has tax and financial consequences. Next, check to make sure the name you want to use for your business is available. You can do this by checking with the Minnesota Secretary of State office. If you want to be a sole proprietor, all you have to do is register the business name with the Secretary of State office. Or if your business is going to be an LLC or a corporation, when you file the business structure registration with the Secretary of State's office, that registration also includes the business name. After that, you may need to obtain federal and state tax identification numbers from the Internal Revenue Service and the Minnesota Department of Revenue. Note that some businesses won't need to take this step. Need is determined by the number of business owners, if the business will have employees, and if the business makes taxable sales or provides taxable services. Next, obtain any necessary licenses and permits from state and local government. Then you will need to buy or rent space for the business and set up phone and internet service. You'll also want to start a banking and credit relationship with a bank or other financial institution. And don't forget to write a business plan with benchmarks to guide you through business growth. We can help you.
And remember, if you need help in any of these steps, please reach out to us here at the Small Business Assistance Office. We have staff.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Department of Human Services. We're glad to have you here today. We opened our building for the public that people come in for on Friday. Our employees have been able to come back here the entire time. Work better in the building than they could. And more people were on Friday and for today. I will tell you that right now is about a dozen people per floor of the 8 floors of the building. We're still making this up as we go along. What hybrid life is going to look like. And we just share with you that I came back here off the morning. I've been here off and on in the last couple of years. But my senior management team is in the room down the hall for their first in-person meeting. And it is just surreal to be here. Not only is it fairly empty, but all the clocks say 7 or 7:45 or 8:45 or if there was a thunderstorm that came and shut down the electricity and all the clocks are on. Someone told me they've been here throughout. Said that the employees who came every day decided to take over the building and took down all the wall calendars in 2020 because it was just too creepy. Someone this morning wondered if you could eat the machine or is it 2 years old? Things like that. It is just odd. But also wonderful. Back and doing something similar. I hope it was okay for you to get into construction in 1994. Wouldn't you know that would start just when we were coming back? And I hope it was okay for you to find a place to park. So we're just delighted to host you here today. And now, I will say that some members of this council are attending this meeting remotely due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Section 13.021 allows for members to attend meetings during the pandemic because their attendance at an in-person meeting under Section 13 is not practical because of the health pandemic declared under Chapter 12. Over to you. Amy, hello, Amy. Good to see you. Hello. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. You all in person. We are going to take 5 minutes to warm up into answer two questions that are over on the wall. What do you hope to get out of today? And the second question is, what do we need to make sure we get right in phase 2? And in front of you you have large Post-it notes. If you want to grab one of those, not a pen, just better we see it. And write your responses to those two questions. We'll take 5 minutes, and then I will go through our agenda and we'll get the rest of our meeting. And we're not going to talk right away, but we're going to come back in the second half of our meeting.
Y'all are being so quiet. That our virtual people thought that things broke.
So Brad is on, and Eric was like, turn back.
Yes, I am.
Brad.
Hello. I'm assuming we're supposed to leave our cameras off, is that right?
Also, Brett, if you have access to the chat, I did put the prompts in the chat since we can't read those flip chart papers. So you're welcome to either unmute and respond to the prompts or type your responses in the chat if you'd like.
Okay. I don't see anybody else that's not on camera. Am I the only person that would have?
You're the only person attending virtually right now. Neil will be joining us in about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Amber.
Yeah, just so you know, Brett, you're on a big screen in the room. I'll change your view so you can see what you look like.
I think I put my makeup on. Oh, I see.
Now, new energy for our word, camaraderie. Lots of good ideas here. Make the word human. All right, I think that's everybody. Let me know if you're not done. I think we're good. I will hand this over to you, Mom.
Yeah, that one.
Beautiful. Well, let me just start by saying welcome and a big hand for all of you. I am just struck. I'm sorry if I haven't hugged all of you yet. I'll get to you eventually. I'm a serial hugger. I'm just struck, one, by just how much work has been done by this group for many months now, and how it feels like we're kind of turning the corner. So today, to me, feels like an important gathering. On our agenda, we're going to spend some time listening to a panel that one of our subgroups has put together, but also spending some time just kind of reporting out on where we're at in each of our subgroups. And I know many of the subgroups have been meeting outside of the regular meetings. And so just a huge thank you on behalf of all of us for taking that time and for bringing your creativity to it. I was talking to somebody, I went to the State of the State last night. I was talking to somebody about the work of this group and it's what a huge charge. I mean, I was trying to explain it and it was like, my goodness, that's a big wide open charge. And it is. But I also feel like if you read anything about the governor's speech last night, it was about some of these bigger themes, and it was about thinking bigger, thinking in a more unified, breaking through the noise. And I think that's kind of about what we seem to be doing here. So just a huge thank you for all the work, and a big thank you to the staff. My goodness, staff has just been working their tails off. So all of you, I won't name you particularly because you're all on there every darn week. In one way or another, but let's give them a hand. I think the agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to start off with a panel and then have report outs from each of the subgroups. Spend some time to kind of chew on that with across all of our groups. That's today's agenda. Do we have a slide that talks about kind of where we're at in the process? I kind of feel like we're in the middle of phase 2. The middle being kind of reporting out. Yeah, there we are. April 25th. So we've still got 2, 4, 5, 6 meetings left. But very much still in the refinement. And I know as Jeff and I have been talking with the staff about how ready was anybody to be presenting today? We know that there's a lot of work left to do, and there's that not everybody is, kind of fully developed by any stretch. So, so much more to come, but it's a gradual process. I think I keep telling myself, trust the process, and I do trust the process. More importantly, trust the people that are around you and with you, and I really do trust everyone in that way. So. So about halfway through phase 2, filling out the roadmap. I know in our small group, we're literally just kind of putting ideas out there and talking to some outside folks. In some groups, I know that looks a little bit more formal and a little bit more structured. In other places, it's not so much. It's fine. We're getting, I think, some good ideas generated. And again, we'll kind of start into that, I think, that winnowing process here, kind of in the coming weeks. We have a virtual town hall on May 25th. That will kind of be an opportunity for the broader public and others to kind of chime in. And I know we have an online, a potential online audience with us as we do every meeting today. And I just want to send a shout out to, I see Brett Carter there, and I know Neil Kashkari, I think, was going to be joining us virtually as well. So thanks to both of you for joining us virtually. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to get us kicked off on our panel. Do I have that right?
That sounds good. We're running a little early.
All right. Sure.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And it is good to see everyone here. It's energizing, really energizing. And that's my biggest hope for today, so we can just get some energy being in person together on this topic. So our group that is leading today's discussion on the subgroup focus is focused on community. And our value statement is that Minnesota be the healthiest, greenest, safest, most equitable place for communities to thrive. And, community is really kind of the core word in our vision statement of our group. And a lot of that's because economic growth and business development oftentimes happens at a very local level, right? We're here talking about the state and the future in 10 years, but boy, it is at the community level where a lot of that growth really happens. So we've really honed in on community and local in our group and talking about this. And I just want to recognize my colleagues in the group, Joe Fowler, Nanoka Sato, and Brett Carter, who's up on the screen there, as partners in this. And we've been having some great meetings, great conversations. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is, when you're in a good community, you know it. You can kind of feel this community is working. There's trust, there's pride, there's a sense that we're working together. And that when your community works, they're kind of force multipliers. There's a kind of a je ne sais quoi about a good community, that when a community is working, it takes everything else in that community, just makes it a little bit better. And so as we start to discuss, what does strong community look like as it relates to growth, we've broken it down into four basic categories. We've broken it down to public safety, civic engagement, great public schools, and strong arts and culture and outdoor recreation. So these things that kind of make you want to be in a community, make you want to be out and about in a community. We have four speakers who will be filtering in over the next few minutes here to help us kind of kick that off. But since we are running a little early, I thought I'd just open the floor and ask for the group to kind of reflect out loud with one another. What are the things that you think about? I guess if you pause and think about a great community you've been a part of or been in or been to, what are some of the things that made that community really work in your mind? What are things that in your mind are signs of a great community? Block parties.
Yeah.
Theater. Great.
We've had some courageous conversations in our neighborhoods where we've met in the driveways of different neighbors, and we just talk about the city. I mean, here and so it's been. I think that really united a lot of us in our neighborhood, in our community.
That's awesome. A group, just things that make you think strong community.
Welcoming spaces. At neighborhood watch, like you knew that people had your back, both like the block parties and the invitation to come be a part of something, but also at the same time, like watching out, pulling you in a collaborative way, positive way.
Yeah. Yeah, you need something, you get it. Yeah.
People being affirmatively involved.
I can say, here's the civil segment.
We've had local officials come through as well as meet and greet. You know, where we've had the police chief come through. We've had you know, council members and things come through and just share, you know, things about the community.
Yeah, knowing your public safety officials, knowing the community leaders really well.
We also seen that new Netflix show, the Japanese show about this like little tiny kid who like goes on a shopping spree on her own. It's called like On Your Own.
They said little kids there.
Yeah, like 2-3-year-olds, like in Japanese neighborhood, you have to like go and get, you know, 3 things. And then I was thinking about this just in terms of like why Japan has that kind of culture. Like a 2-year-old can just walk 2 miles to go to the store to buy something. And it's really cute as a, you know, as a TV show. And yet, like, I would like to see that here too. I feel like that's also
Yeah.
a big.
I was explaining to my 5-year-olds the other day that I used to walk to kindergarten by myself, you know, in my small town, and they were just, their minds were blown. Do that. Yeah. Yeah, right.
So excited everything was all good back. I did.
Otherwise, you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Marcus, see kids out there. I can't really.
Somebody moved to Minnesota because they said they had a sense that here people had thought they had an obligation.
A sense of responsibility, really. Do people in the room feel like sense of community in Minnesota has gotten stronger over the past 10 years, weaker, same? Sense for the trajectory that your community's on, that could be either rhetorical or if you want to share thoughts.
I grew up in when I was like over. That's yeah, so. Political thing.
Yeah.
Commissioner, the interpreters are asking if you can repeat what people are saying in the room.
Oh, great. Okay. Jeff mentioned political polarization, and I think Joe mentioned sides on this front. Well, this has been, I think, just a good warm up for us. And as Joe and Brett and Anoko and I thought about kind of how to convene a good conversation today, we wanted to take advantage of the fact that we are in person, obviously, so it's a little bit different than your typical panel. I'm going to introduce our guests in just a moment here, but then we're going to start with a bit of a warm up and have those guests convene us in smaller groups for a conversation along some prompts, just to kind of get the conversation started in a smaller group format. And then we'll kind of inflect to a broader panel with those leaders about halfway through. So thank you for coming together today. Thank you to our guests. I'm going to introduce them now. We're thrilled to have them here. We have 4 esteemed leaders with us who are going to help us think about this issue of community, what it means, and along those themes I discussed just a moment ago. So first, we are thrilled to welcome Sina Hodges. Sina, hello. We're thrilled to have Sina. Sina is the chair of the board of the Walker Art Center. She also has a business herself called The Woke Coach, where she helps businesses and other leaders get woke, I assume. And we're going to learn more about that. And, really her appointment as the first person of color to run the Walker Art Center's board was really monumental for this community, especially in the wake of some of the controversy of a couple of years ago. So Sina, welcome. We'll give you a round of applause for today. I'm also joined by my friend Sandra Samuels, who's here from Northside Achievement Zone. Give it up for Sandra. Sandra, who runs Northside Achievement Zone, serves a number of board positions, a lot of patients, so she'll lead that conversation. I should mention, Sina will be focusing on culture, obviously, given her role. Walker. I'm joined by my right by my colleague, Commissioner Sarah Stroman from the Department of Natural Resources. Sarah, welcome. Sarah has been a mayor, she's been in business, she's now, of course, running the state's DNR, and she'll be focused now on sort of outdoor recreation alongside Sina and that group. So we're kind of pairing those two things together as kind of arts and culture and outdoor recreation. And then we're very pleased to welcome an elected official to the room, our Secretary of State, Steve Simon, who's with us. Simon. The Secretary of the House for 10 years, with that passionate advocate on the front of civic engagement. So keep that discussion on civic engagement, but what that means for economic growth. So all of this, of course, through the lens of economic expansion, how these things help communities stay strong and be allowed to grow. I'm going to turn over to Amy Shrimp, who's going to walk through how this will work, but we're going to get into smaller groups and get warmed up with these great speakers. Amy.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, so as the Commissioner said, we'll be doing some small group conversations for about the next 20 minutes. And before we jump in and get into the details of the work, if everybody could take a moment and introduce yourselves, share your name and position, and then what allows for Minnesota communities to thrive. Not the long form answer though, just like a real quick and dirty, like this is the thing that will really, really set us apart and help communities to thrive. So we'll go around and do that. And then each table has a facilitator, and we'll be asking questions of our guest speakers around what's the one change or strategy. I can't see it. Okay, it came back. Thank you.
Sorry.
What's the one change or strategy you feel would best support economic expansion in the next 5 years? And then current barriers and what it would take to successfully implement. So we will go into that for the next 20 minutes or so, and we'll keep track of time and let you know when to come back together for the panel.
So Brett and Neil, I put the link
So some of the states that you
Oh, I'm all right. Christina, Steve,
But yeah.
Sarah, Sandra.
Yeah, okay.
We'll bring it to the larger group and I think you got the big conversation.
Yeah.
I want to let the whole group benefit from your wisdom. Thanks again for joining us. And I'll start with some questions. Well, let's keep this pretty open, team. So just if others have questions, follow-ups, just chime in. We'll make this very conversational. So maybe just to kick us off, you started the conversation at your tables. Can we just hear maybe a readout of some of the insights and things that you think are most important to share with this group about how your area of expertise is critical to thriving communities and a growing economy? Zena, we'll start with you and just head on the line with some brief insights, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, pass the mic. Thank you.
You know, one of the things that we talked about, and I think this might come up in your conversation too, is that notion of education and who gets to be in those right roles. One of the things we talked about is I'm the president of the board of the Walker, first African American person, first person of color to be in that role, right? And also just looking at institutions like the Walker in town, and some of these places don't have curators of color, right? And it means not that people don't want curators of color in that space, but also how have we invested in people of color to let them know that being a curator is something that they could do, and also supporting them on that journey through their education and through their pursuits. So that was a big thing that came up at the table in a short time. I'm just gonna pass it.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sitting next to another first. Let's give it up. You're so yeah, we talked about a lot of things at our table, and I'm just gonna, so my focus is on, aligned contribution for our really collective impact, aligned contribution. One of my key partners here is Paul Williams in terms of housing. So kids need everything, right? They're not siloed. And then for them to have a great education, they do need to be stable, and they do need to know where their next meal is coming from, and have safety at home and in community and healthcare. I mean, like, they do need all of those things. And the thing that I've talked about in terms of education is that we have to be curious around this subject and why Minnesota is dead last. And on most things we measure when it comes to educating Black, Brown, and Indigenous and low-income children. Like, we have to be curious as to why. Are our children different here? Because we're at the bottom of almost every state. We are dead last at graduating Black, Latinx, and Indigenous children from high school in 4 years, right? And so these are the same kids. So while we work on wraparound supports and know that it's critical, in these other states, kids struggle with wraparound supports. And the adults there, we don't have a child problem, we have an adult problem. The adults there are still able to educate our kids better, even when they struggle with the same things they struggle here. I'm not saying they don't need them, but what's unique about Minnesota's water? And so what I would say is that we have systemic racism. If white kids, and I know you all know that, but if white kids were being failed, I'm not saying the kids are failing, we're failing them. I'm putting myself in that equation as well. We're not doing enough, right? We just lost another young 20-year-old African-American man who got shot on Wednesday in North Minneapolis, died, over the weekend. 4 people were killed, I think, in Minneapolis over the weekend. Somebody else told me, I didn't see that, but I've heard. But anyway, but we're seeing this carnage that's tied to kids who don't have hope and aren't being cared for by us, the adults. And this is how we shift our economy. If all of our children and people are not benefiting, cannot participate in the economy, because we're not educating our kids to participate in the 21st century economy. And I'm just gonna say this, we are in a break the glass, pull the alarm moment, right? So our kids, there is the gap that we talked about, the achievement gap between white kids and kids of color has grown exponentially over the last 2 years, right? Our kids are more behind than 20 years ago when many of us were at the table. We were at the table with Alf coming up with, a blueprint for how to, they're more behind than they were before. And unless we get serious, and this is not just about money, right? Because we've had money in the state around education. I used to work for Ford Motor Company, and when some of our products didn't sell, we didn't just keep trying to sell them, right? Our shareholders wanted a return on their investment. So we would stop some things, but we got busy with innovation. And Minnesota has been stubborn about innovating when it comes to Black and Brown and Indigenous and low-income children in their education.
You know, I think I would maybe just tie both of what you both just said a little bit, and obviously, you know, we're at the same table, but we talked a little bit about, I think actually some unique commonalities between outdoor spaces and arts and culture and sort of what those things mean to people and community and experience. And, you know, a lot of times in conversation, we say, well, where'd you go last weekend? You know, what park were you at? What show did you see? What movie did you see? What concert did you go to? Right. And that happens sort of at a macro scale, you know, these really big, well-known places that we have, like the Walker, the Guthrie, Itasca State Park, or it can happen in really small venues in communities all across the state. And so, but I think one of the things that we both talked about, we both experienced, and a little bit what you were talking about is we kind of rest on our exceptionalism. So I loved your statistic, right? The most theater seats per capita. We brag all the time about our 75 state parks and state recreation areas. You know, never mind that the one I had the governor out at 2 weeks ago, the park manager had to clean the snakes out of the building before we got there, right? You don't hear that side of the story. You don't hear the side of the story about where are we not investing, who's not getting to participate, who's not being included. And so I think we need to focus. We talked about on some of those things about where do we really need to be making the investment to make sure that all Minnesotans are benefiting from whether it's nature and the recreation or the community or the health benefits. Let's not forget the health. I keep talking. I feel like I'm now this health professional right after COVID, as we all experience the health benefits of getting outside. But we really need to be focusing less, I think, on the statistics about our exceptionalism and what we've done right, and focusing on the statistics about where are the gaps and what do we need to do to fill those gaps.
That's a great segue to some of the conversation that we had. Minnesota exceptionalism is great. There's nothing wrong with talking about the aggregate numbers. I love to talk about how we're #1 in the country, 3 times in a row, by the way, in voter turnout, and that's great at about 80%, but what about the 20%, right? Who are they? Where do they live? Where do they come from, et cetera? But to our discussion about civic engagement, some of these themes is really eerie and interesting. Access and inclusion. Accessibility really matters to civic engagement, not just voting. We talked about some examples of voting, but civic engagement in general, making it okay, making it inviting for people to enjoy those pursuits. There was a lot of talk at our table about that, about you knew people so coming to Minnesota, being able to break into that. And we have folks at our table who were well represented by people who come from other places, but have made Minnesota home, at least for now. And so I think those themes of access and inclusion were dominant at our table as well. And they ran the gamut from, you know, the caucus system, for example. You have debates about that. Is that inclusive? Is that accessible? Is it not? To other forms of civic participation. Those were themes that at least stuck out to me.
This council is tasked with a roadmap for the next 10 years, a playbook, a very practical playbook. What should we do? You know, how do we get to the place where Minnesota is the healthiest, greenest, safest, most equitable place to have a community thrive? Let's come back down the road. If you could share one specific thing that you think needs to change in Minnesota, that we need to do in Minnesota to make your area of expertise stronger for our economy. Give us some practical kind of playbook-like tips if you could, and we'll open up to other questions here too.
So I'm looking for validation to our group. I want to faithfully represent what you said, but I think there was this idea of, maybe this is general enough, of specific enough rather, but one variant of inclusion can be having things in people's native languages, you know, in civic spaces, not just voting, but others. That's one example, but there are others. Anything I'm forgetting in terms of a more tangible? Oh, right, yes. Oh, right. The district mapping of economic development authorities as well, and making sure that those two are inclusive and not dividing up communities.
I
pipeline and mentoring as well. Yes.
Well, I think, I mean, in my space and in outdoor recreation industry, I'm actually give some credit to a task force that did some work on this area that we convened along with Explore Minnesota Tourism. And the task force worked for a little bit over a year on the question of what can we do to expand and enhance at the outdoor recreation industry in Minnesota. It's quite strong, stronger than people think, a pretty big contributor to our economy at the state level and to the economies of communities all across the state. But they looked at it, and a couple of things that they highlighted in their recommendations. One was equity, and equity of access, equity in the industry, not only in the outdoor spaces, but into the industry as well, the economic. And the second thing I'll highlight out of their report and recommendations was the need to better coordinate activities related to outdoor recreation. They actually recommended a state office of outdoor recreation. A lot of states are doing that. I will say my bias is against creating one more state office or agency, but I think there are huge opportunities and we're already taking advantage of them for agencies like Explore Minnesota Tourism, Minnesota DNRD, and to work more closely with the private sector and some of the business associations to think about that strategy of boosting up outdoor recreation industry, and working on the issue of equity and inclusion.
Thank you. By the way, my Senate District Convention 59 was from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. one Saturday. It was crazy. Anyway, yeah, so innovation. So innovating in education, like we have to do it and be courageous and know that our kids are dying literally and figuratively, not white kids, but Black, brown, low-income, indigenous kids, because we have not had the will to do some uncertain things, to like get out there and be innovative. And one thing I'm going to hold up, and by the way, the gift of COVID, the gift of George Floyd's murder, the gift of the civic unrest has been that we know we cannot go back to normal. Normal wasn't normal for people who look like me. And so we have to be creating this new normal. We have such an opportunity. So one of the ways to innovate, and we need more mentoring, we need more tutors. When I look at the data, anybody who's studying the data around academics, it almost feels like white middle-class kids did better during COVID, like still at 80% proficiency. Again, kids of color largely at 20% proficiency, being failed even more. Again, I'm not saying they're failing, we're failing them. Being failed even more in math. And so what we know is that the kids in the more affluent neighborhoods, still in Minneapolis, for example, that's where I'm from, they had tutoring pods. They had the money to get Huntington's and Kuhlman and all of this, and it made a difference in their academic education. And then I'm going to hold up my buddy Neil around the Page Amendment, right? And I know people are all over the place with supporting it, not supporting it, but I talked about this before. Can we be curious around the things that we don't see potentially being able to work, but because we hear that they work other places, that we might be curious as to why it's needed here? And for us to take our moral document, our Constitution of the United States, of Minnesota, and make a declaration that all kids, and that we mean all, will have a quality education over our dead bodies that they won't, and but based on agreed upon standards, and then get busy with the experts and coming up with those standards will be. Instead of what I hear is, well, we don't really know how that's going to work. Let me tell you what we do know. Black and brown kids are being failed. Like, we know that. And I'm going on 25 years, I'm going on a quarter century of focusing on the academic progress of kids who are being left behind. And it's worse than it was a quarter of a century before. So we know that doesn't work. Can we move into the unknown for the sake of all our children? And there are a lot of ways we can innovate, but the Page Amendment, I think, is one that really would make we would put our mouths, our hearts and our mouths and our hands where we say we are.
So at our table, when we started the conversation and we were answering the question about community, a couple things came up. And one of those things was like naming your circumstance, like naming the truth of your circumstance and being honest and being transparent. And one of the things that I noticed is that every couple years, there's the same article that's written. And the article is about the exodus of Black and brown people from Minnesota. Like, we're leaving, people can't retain us, we don't want to be here. And at a point, it's an honest article, it's the truth, but we still don't do anything different when we have the information. And we feel like because we wrote the article, we talked about it, we talked about the thing, right? So we talked about it, right? And it's like, yeah, we talked about it, but we haven't done anything different. And so, you know, to Sandra's point, I think it's important for us to be able to think differently and to act differently, right? Especially when we have resources. We don't have to double and triple and quadruple down on the things that we've done historically because those are the things that we've done. We write this article, we write the article, we wrote the article, right? That's not it. It's not working. The article is not keeping people here, right? So what action are we gonna employ that changes how we engage? When I think about the notion of arts and culture, livability and being able to be here and a part of a community is a really important point for people, right? For me, I moved here from New York City. And I'm gonna be honest with you, the only reason I still live in Minnesota is because I met my husband here and we got married. Had I not, I probably wouldn't be here because it was the kind of thing where I was asking basic questions like, where do I get my hair done? Who do I hang out with? Like basic things that I needed for my own life. And so when we think about arts and culture, and we think about livability, and we think about the arts ecosystem, it's filled with lots of different people. It's not just the artists that you see either on stage or making art for, you know, public engagement. What you have are donors and funders, right? You have people who are audience members. You have a whole ecosystem of people. And if we want to keep all of those people engaged in some part of this, we got to do some things differently. And the thing I think is interesting is that you have, you know, here we have a group of large cultural arts institutions. We have the Walker, we have the Guthrie, we have the Opera, we have the orchestra, I could go on. But you also, Susan alluded to the point I made at the table, there's a quote that we always talk about, we have like 98, we have more seats per theater, more theater seats per capita, you know, anywhere else in New York City, right? So that's something that we talk about all the time is our number of theater seats. And the reality of in a pre-COVID world, at any given moment in the Twin Cities, there were 98 theater companies just doing stuff. Whether that was 10 people or 5 people or 25 people, and they were actively doing work. And one of the things that we've done is we've always historically invested in the larger institutions. And I'm not saying that the larger institutions don't need support, they do. But I am saying that these smaller institutions who are telling different stories, who have different representation, who are allowing us to have different lived experiences and making us more richer, we do also have to invest in those institutions as well. And so it's just the notion that a rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. Let's open this up. I think there's some mics at the table. I'm told we should use them so that our friends on the video conference can hear. But thoughts, reactions, questions for our panelists from the rest of the council?
I just know, just in terms of theaters, so I'm on the board of Theater Moo, and I learned something recently that apparently theaters of color just generally expect a deficit when they have a production. Yeah. And so they actually state because of things like no one comes, or they're just trying to make things more accessible. And so when you don't invest in smaller institutions, they're not going to be part of this like ecosystem of, you know, like very rich and diverse of theater. So that's just one example. I just wanted to note that, and I really appreciate it.
And also when you think about budgets, like a budget is like a piece of paper that is your values on paper. Right. And so at a point, if you're a theater company of color, you feel like you can't even value yourself because you can't even invest and feel like you all should make a profit on this work. Right. It should be emotional labor. And we do have to change that narrative that we're supposed to do this on behalf of other people and not be compensated for being able to contribute in the same way.
I've got a question. I'm being polite to y'all, but so my question really is about the education side of things and just, you know, you brought up that Black, brown, indigenous children are failing at higher rates, and specifically in Minnesota at some of the bottoms. Now
I'm gonna change that. your language. We're failing them at higher.
We're failing that. You've done this longer than me, so I'm
No,
gonna use the
no,
improper
that's why I
context
wanna
sometimes.
get that in
But-
our heads.
But what changes that? When you, earlier at our table, you talked about some of that, you believe is some systematic racism and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe in some of the instructional or teaching staff possibly, because even if we fully funded the education system, so if North Minneapolis was fully funded, a higher level of BIPOC community members as compared to Edina being fully funded, do you believe that there would still, and I only assume this, but, are there more teachers that resemble the community that they're in North Minneapolis? So that the racism between, or the systematic racism between the instructor and the people wouldn't be there. So if that's the case, you have teachers that are representative of the community, and you fully fund both education systems, would you expect similar outcomes? Or what other things are there besides just fully funding the education system as a buzzword saying? I'm certainly for that, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problem because we talked about how it's just not give them money and, you know, school money and that solves the
It's
problem.
gotta be effective.
What is there other than that if you have instructors that are representative of the community?
Do your thing. Okay, so let me just say this, right? I am never out to throw a bomb and offend people. So even when I talk about racism, I need you to know I hold that gingerly, right? And so I'm not doing a Molotov cocktail of racism. However, and so I hope you can be curious about what I'm saying right now. Racism is so prevalent in every institution in Minnesota. That's why, you know, in home ownership, in education, incarceration, longevity. Again, Minnesota is at the bottom for all of those quality of lifestyle. White folks here, communities of color down there. Education specifically, I'm gonna give you a case in point, just recently, okay? Minnesota and Minneapolis, like 1% of the teachers are BIPOC teachers, right? 1%. In the state of Minnesota, I think it's 96% of teachers are white. But in the city, for example, 65% of the kids are kids of color. So the question has to be, and then there's all kind of research about what difference it makes, especially when a Black boy has one Black male teacher, one, in terms of his outcomes, potential outcomes around graduating high school and going on to some post-secondary. We understand role modeling. We understand being able to see ourselves in positions of power, right? That's why we have 3 white men carved on a mountain, Mount Rushmore. We know it matters. But anyway, so we know what all the data says. There are organizations like Black Men Teach. But for years, we have had, the Education of Minnesota has had a rule, last in, first out. So, and nobody wants to talk about it because it looks like you're against labor. And I'm not against labor. I wouldn't be where I am if my daddy wasn't a longshoreman. I'm not, but I am for kids. And so, last in, first out, all of these different cities would have these pipelines of teachers of color. In Minneapolis, it was called Grow Your Own. They were doing it forever. But as soon as there's a layoff, and there's always a layoff at some point, who goes first? Teachers of color, like every time. And the district communities had been speaking up about that. The Education of Minnesota was recalcitrant, stubbornly holding on to that seniority. Most recently, and what we have happening, and again, I love teachers, right? And I understand that unions are about the adults. I understand that and their members. So I'm not a hater in that. But most recently, Black BIPOC teachers have filed a complaint of racism, of structural racism, because during the most recent strike, where the issue of protections for teachers of color should have been the top of the fold for what the teachers were striking for, it wasn't even mentioned. And so BIPOC teachers were trying to go to strike lines and hold up signs that say, we want protections for teachers of color, so to get rid of the last in, first out, so that you could keep more of your teachers of color when, and like 50 Black teachers of color had been excessed, let go at that time. They were told that they couldn't hold up their sign. They were told, and again, you can read about it. It's all out there. It's a current. But finally, BIPOC teachers are standing up and talking about the racism within their own membership. And it takes courage to do that. But Joe, if you ask me why things are the way they are, it's because things are the way they are. And we lack the courage to question. And we just have to be curious and say, how do we not end stuff, but mend it so that we really bring equity? How have we as a state with and allowed 96% of our teaching force to still be all white when we have such a browning of our communities all across that, because that rule was never challenged. It has been now. So I just said, I just got really politically incorrect just now. So, and I just want to, but I gotta tell you, we're losing so many kids that I'm okay with.
Awesome. You know, like there's one.
Well, I would, first of all, thank you all so very much. But I would challenge this group to think those conditions, those standards are not limited to education. We see that in many different areas. We see it in your area, Joe. The same thing takes place. Last one, you see these efforts, hey, we need to bring more. I was just down in Rochester talking about ways to bring diversity into the construction industry. Same thing. All the effort put forth, where can I, one of the gentlemen that was in the audience came up after and say, you know, we're doing everything that we can, but even when we do, we can't keep Black men on the construction site. And they said, have you ever thought to ask the last one that left, what was the problem? Because if you're not supporting folks once they get there, all of the effort, you know, however you go about your recruiting, it doesn't matter if they're not welcome when they walk in the door. Yeah. If they do not have a support system there. So I would say that that is not unique to education. It's not unique to the construction industry. That's the way it is across the board. And in order to actually move, first of all, I feel like we have to recognize you're never going to get equity out of systems that were designed to be inequitable. So I sit through lots of these conversations and it's like, sounds good. How can we make this more equitable? I'm not saying tear it down, burn it down, but I'm saying that you can say that. You know, an apple tree will never produce a pear. So if it wasn't designed to produce equitable outcomes, then a lot of this just feels like bureaucracy to me. This is how we make ourselves feel better, by talking about it, like the article. Yeah. So I don't think it's unique to individual systems, construction, education. Well, housing, you don't get booted out, you just aren't allowed in. But there are many challenges, and I think we have to challenge a lot of our thinking and recognize where the systems are not equitable, they'll never produce equitable outcomes. So how do we start to systematically dismantle those inequitable systems and start with, first of all, recognizing that we're not going to get to the other end that way. And we're not going to see the systems improve because they weren't designed for that.
Sure.
Yeah. I want to just make a note about the term equity too, right? One of the things that's, you know, we all know that groups of people, even though they have shared characteristics, it doesn't mean that they have the same lived experience or that they're a monolith. So I want to be clear about that. But also when we talk about the term of equity, just also making sure that when we're thinking about how we're planning and going to give someone a plan to say, this is what we think the roadmap should be, that when we're thinking of notions of equity, that we're thinking about what each person needs to be successful in a given circumstance, right? And to use the example that you just gave, if they interviewed 10 Black men that left them, they might get 10 different responses for why they left. So it doesn't mean that if we do this one thing that Black men will stay here, in particular. It means that we have to condition ourselves to have better conversations with people so that we can have different outcomes. If someone said to all of us that we were going to run the upcoming Twin Cities Marathon, but they gave us all the size 8 male shoe and a diet plan that we all had to follow, some of us in here, can y'all wear size 8 man shoe? I can't. So it doesn't even work for me. So I think we also have to start thinking about what it like when we're really talking about equity, how are we really trying to solve for people's specific needs?
And we just have a few minutes left before we can let you all go. And again, I'm so grateful for your time. In just a couple of seconds each, I'd love for you to just define for us what's an aspirational 10-year goal in your area for our state that we could all kind of point to and say, okay, let's get there in this area as a goal moving forward. Sorry, Yusina.
I'm gonna give it to you and
That's our kind of horizon for the report. Yeah.
Yeah. So in my universe, we will, as a state, have made a commitment that all of our children will receive a quality education. And that we would actually put plans together around curriculum, around literacy. We're so far behind around literacy across the state, around math, around STEM, around digital learning experiences, around mental health, right? And by the way, not just for the scholars, but also for the teachers. Our teachers are really struggling right now. But we would make that commitment and we would see the effects borne out like I know we can't eradicate the opportunity gap in education in a decade, but we can sure take a bite out of it.
For us in the outdoor recreation, natural resources space, it would be that investing in our assets, investing in a system, but investing in ways that are different than just fixing what we have, but really thinking about, is the system serving all Minnesotans and making sure that we are making those investments, that we are making strides towards a more equitable and accessible system.
Well, since my lane of civic engagement tends to focus on voting, I'll go there, which is to say we're at 80% voter turnout, just about, but that is not equal among every community, demographic or geographic. And I'd say a 10-year plan would be to make sure that whatever percentage we're at, that we converge on a percentage, whether it's 80 or 70 or 85, that is more, I'll use that word again, equitable across communities. That more communities are voting at that 5% don't have the imbalance.
Right.
And that Minnesota's a 13-time champion.
Right. Yeah. Right.
10 times before.
And your goal?
10-year goal. Okay, couple. One, investing in these smaller institutions and trying to create more equity in that regard. The other thing I think that hadn't come up, but it came up at the table in the back, is the thing I'm passionate about is like this notion of student debt and how expensive it is to just go to school and then you come out on the other side and you're supposed to have this great career, but if you're working in the nonprofit sector, it's like, oh, but you love it, you do it for the mission, but you can't pay your bills. So I think there has to be some notion of how we think about what it costs to be a working professional.
Yeah.
Steve, can I just add one more thing? Sure. Yeah, I just participated in the bigotry of low expectation. So, again, as I talk about us failing kids, I want to put myself in there too. So we can eradicate the gap in education. We absolutely can, from prenatal all the way through to college. And so my mom said to me before, don't meet me where I am, meet me where I dream. And so if you're serious about where we should be dreaming, it is the eradication of the gap in a decade. And we can do it.
Amen. Well, Sina, Sandra, Sarah, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Alan, we're asking if this guy, were you videoing this and is it going? Because we gotta like.
You look good.
It's a public meeting and we can.
No, it's cool. It's Twitter is on fire right
That's all right. Let's go. Let's go.
Great. Well, thank you again. I'm gonna turn to Paul, who's gonna take it from here.
Thank you. So big hand for our panel. Fabulous conversation, and thanks to, I think of, Steve, Joe, Nanoco, Brent, all on that subgroup, for pulling that together for us. Really push our thinking, I think. So we're gonna take a 10-minute break, come back, and then we'll be reporting out from the, subgroups on kind of progress to date. So, grab something, refreshment in the back. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
And just
and scope and what they've been working on. So that's really exciting. One thing that I want to invite you to do, you don't have to do this, but if you would like, if you have ideas or thoughts about any subcommittees, kind of what they're putting together, whether it might be some of the flip charts over here, what this looks like, and some of the strategies or what strategies might address. If you have ideas based on the conversation today that you want to add in or something that's just come to mind, pop it on a Post-it note and feel free to put it up there, just in case there's something. You don't have to have that input, but if you do. And so we will go ahead and get started with our first subcommittee, which would be the Thriving Communities. Who do we have on deck to share a little bit, just a couple minutes about what we are working on?
Really high level, super high level too. Yeah.
All right, I will.
Great.
Go Steve.
I think you've,
Super high level.
you've heard enough from me already, probably, but I will get us started. So I think we're all next page of this one, but again, our vision statement: healthiest, greenest, safest, most equitable place for communities to thrive. On 4 areas I mentioned: public safety, arts and culture, outdoor recreation, civic engagement, and quality K-12 education. We didn't address public safety today, as you may have noticed. We just too many things at once, but that is an area that we're spending a considerable amount of time investigating. And again, I mean, a lot of reasons you've heard them today, but making a desirable place to live and talent attraction, creating economic opportunity, building a social fabric that's central to equity, and again, that kind of force multiplier nature of community. One of the things we heard a lot on our tables today too is just a lot of these areas help us grapple with the issues that are central to whether we're going to grow and how we're going to grow. Think of what Sina and Sarah shared about the outdoors and about arts and how that helps us examine ourselves and then improve ourselves as a society. So we got a little aspirational with our Margaret Mead quote, which I'm sure you've all heard here, but this is kind of at the heart of what we're talking about: very localized, very community centered focus on economic growth. So that's kind of a summary. And do we have 2 slides? I think.
Nope.
Just
The rest of your slide content is over on these on the flip charts. So yep.
Thank you to the Thriving Communities group. Next up, we have the Health Equity group, and great.
Hello. Can I just say again that it's really great to be with all of you in a room, for those of you who can be here. So it's just really a delight to actually get to know you differently and better. So our vision statement, we really actually went to the Center for Disease Control, tried not to wordsmith our own as much, but take the best of that through it. So every person in Minnesota has the opportunity to attain his or her full health potential, and no one is disadvantaged from achieving this potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstances. So really looking at addressing health disparities and the full health dimension. Those are health-related social needs. I'd like to change social determinants to not be determinants. I think that would be a measure of our success. These things don't determine health, like food insecurity, transportation needs, access to some of the services we talked to before, but have all these surround services with dental behavioral health. Addressing having a working, caring professions, adequate healthcare workforce, and mobilizing, workforce that Minnesota has failed and forgotten. And why it matters, you really can't have, and we had our 2 of all forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is about the most shocking and inhumane. And so it's at the core of having people to actually be able to grow individually and expand into the workforce, and total health matters for all Minnesotans to participate in the workforce. So, and then we went, and you'll see on the flip charts, is we said, well, how will we know? And how will we know things are improving, and different measures of things that people have access to, including the CDC says poverty, unemployment, high school graduation rates, but also life expectancy, preventable deaths, and those things, and focusing on that. And then Leah has brought a lot about how do we think about people who have been left behind and reintegrate them into this work as well. So that's our group. Anything that anybody wants to say that I stubbornly or somehow left behind? Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you.
Thank you to the Health Equity group. Now we will hear from the Holistic Supports group.
And it was supposed to be Brenda, but she's not here. So Commissioner Robertson, do you want to do it?
Today's my day. Good afternoon, and I would just have to repeat I am actually delighted to be in the room with all of you. It's been amazing. It's a great way to really cement the relationships that we have formed. So thank you. So our group is our subgroup is looking at holistic support. So basically, we want to invest in our current and future workers, including BIPOC entrepreneurs and micro businesses. And I'd like to stop and talk a little bit about the micro businesses because one of our guest speakers really made an impassioned plea that we look beyond the micro businesses and really start to think about how the BIPOC community can grow beyond the thought of the mom, pop, the small, the under 10, and really start to look at how do we build this out? How do we support BIPOC businesses to promote and encourage growth? Also, we would remove systemic barriers to create a just and fair society that supports all to participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. Of course, in looking at holistic supports, we would look at health well-being of workers, supporting businesses at all sizes and purposes as they evolve. And of course, this matters because Minnesota will only be able to prosper when all, including BIPOC workers, entrepreneurs, and small businesses, have the resources that they need to fully support themselves and their families. And I would say really to support communities as well, and our strategies are this. So thank you.
Thanks for stepping in, Commissioner. You could have been an assigned one the whole time, I think. We couldn't tell. Over to Jeff on business support.
Well, for starters, we made a little modification to the original vision statement. This one still talks about the best place to start, but we've kind of modified it. The exact language is a top place to start. Yeah, we kind of wanted to ground it in the reality of what we were hearing from the different panels of people we've spoken to from businesses. So far, we've had panelists who have medium-sized businesses that in many cases are in multiple states and gave us the perspective of different things they're seeing in different states. You all got to see the CEO panel that we brought to the group on a collective basis. And then we have a panel on Friday that we're going to be hearing from entrepreneurs. We're also still hoping to kind of talk to more of a mom and pop street level set of businesses. And our subcommittee also wants to chat with Steve Grove because we want to hear, what's the state's take on this today, and we live it every day. But in terms of grounding that in that kind of reality. We have a significant overlap, obviously, with Rosalind's group on the emphasis on really doing better in the area of diversity, and whether the ultimate report from our group will blend those in some other form versus 5 separate subcommittees. But whether you look at it from the ground up or the businesses down, the solution is the same. I mean, we really are not going to thrive as a state if we don't address this, if this doesn't start improving. And as we heard from our panel today, the daunting task that at least at the education level, it's not improving. So that we really are up against that. Ultimately, our mission is to kind of give that perspective, okay, from a business owner standpoint, what is it going to take? What would be things that would be favorable to the climate over the next 10 years that would encourage more to go on here in the state? So that's really our take right now.
To the business support group and essential drivers. Should I choose? I'm joking. Hi, everybody. Okay. Our group, subgroup 5, is the essential drivers, and we feel like it's highly unfair because this is our vision is Minnesota will have the essential drivers in place to ensure economic prosperity. Those essential drivers are housing, childcare, construction, and education, which are all of the things for our subcommittee. Thanks, Ted. And so
We have a lot here about why this matters. But we've done a fair amount of sort of just coming together and a lot of thinking and talking. And so these are necessary. They're foundations for our for vibrant families and communities. And the fact that we have to talk about it means that they are not in place, right? So before we can even get to expansion and thriving, we need to make sure the foundation is in place. We acknowledge also that certain communities have simply been left out, either by accident or by design, and that whatever we need to do in order to create large-scale equitable change is to really spend the time and make the investments to really make sure that those communities are at the table as we continue to move forward. We have a whole host of specific strategies and suggestions that are on the flip chart that you can see in the area of housing. I will say from a process perspective, many of us have taken different components of this. Some are on their quiet period. Quiet. Neil knows that. So, and many of us are talking to different community members, are talking to DHS staff, to folks in the community about childcare, about housing, to vet all of those pieces. So that's a little bit about sort of how we're approaching this. But we should have like 5 slides.
Can I just add, I can hear you in real time and I can see you in real time, but I can see myself in camera, but my video is delayed like 30 seconds. I don't know why that is. So.
Yeah, it is delayed here too.
Didn't see a giggle at all with that.
It'll catch up. It'll catch
So
up.
you'll see a smile.
I love it. Thank you, everybody, for sharing, bringing everybody up to speed on the work that you're doing in your subgroups. We're going to close out today with a large group conversation, reflecting on what we heard from our speakers, what you talked about in your small groups, and what you've heard from each other with the subgroup report out. And so my question to you, and I'll just come around and pass the mic as folks want to engage in the conversation. But my first question is, what did we hear today that we should integrate? Meaning, what did we hear today that should be integrated in this roadmap? What's going to be really important for you to have in mind and bring forward?
Yeah, and then after this question, Amy, we'll do the flip chart activity.
I would just, Steve and I were talking about this at the break, 2 groups talking about education, and in our subgroup, we have some specifics around education, particularly around outcomes, particularly around the quality education discussion. And I think at some point, merging that with whatever's coming out of Steve's group would obviously make sense.
After the question.
I think one of the things that's just challenging in our group is thinking of all the feedback we're getting of all the things that your groups need to handle. So education, safety, we're talking about a thriving place to business. Our strategic advantage in Minnesota is being a thriving place to live. And that really gets into so many other things. So we're going to be working through that to try to find the area we can kind of have a distinctive set of recommendations, but also just recognizing the feedback is just reinforcing the structure of the other groups. And then the second thing on my mind is on the holistic supports. As you're thinking about, I think there is some real significant overlap there when we talk about, BIPOC entrepreneurship, especially we get into elevating BIPOC entrepreneurship out of micro business into more scalable, well-funded, capitalized businesses. We just need to be, I think it's very likely that the recommendations we come up with would overlap directly with where you might go there. So let's just stay in close touch.
I think the thing that keeps coming to President Liz and I were talking about this during the break is that it feels like we have all the tools, all the resources, but for some reason that there's more of a psychological or behavioral change that has to happen in any of this work. And so how do we articulate that in a real way that's, people thinks forward? Because we have everything that we need right here in front of us.
Thank you. And over to Commissioner Harvstead. I've been watching for some time what I call the last stand of the white majority to protect their privilege across the United States, across the world. And for a while, I thought what was getting in our way was Minnesota nice, and we weren't able to talk about these things. And I really heard a lot today about Minnesota exceptionalism. I think that's probably the real culprit. We were talking on break that we get told all the time that we're number one in the nation in this, we're number one in that, we're number one in this other thing. And my staff is starting to learn to say, well, we're number one for white, but not for everybody, right? And so I'm hearing a lot from everybody today about all Minnesotans this, all Minnesotans that, and it's every one of these slides, it was every one of our speakers. And if we could extend exceptionalism to all Minnesotans, I hope that's a key message in our final report, that all people have the opportunity to thrive. And I just heard that over and over again, and I hope that's in there. Who was it that said we all do better? And so I think the Minnesota Council on Economic Expansion has a real unique opportunity to get that point across, to say we all do better with economic expansion when we all do better. All.
Well, I think, and maybe this wasn't said, but what I took from some of today is, you know, we are a thriving community for some, but not for all. And to part of this year, like maybe it's more mentally, like some people feel this is a great place for that. But we need everybody to feel that way. And whatever those folks have access to, everybody has access to, so that they feel that same way. It's really just trying to break it down to the simplest of terms. You know, I love Minnesota. I work hard. I participate, and I've got a good life. I've been very blessed that way, but not everybody has, and everybody else has access to that. I think everybody's willing to work just as hard to try and make sure they have a good life. So I think you just need to try to build up some of those first, and also the whole life, but those first building blocks or those first stepping stones that aren't on the water for everybody else when they start out somehow. So I'm way more philosophical. Well, we fund the education system.
I would say to build upon, you know, Marcus and Jody and Joe, that I think there's also the fact that we do have to name racism, structural racism, and perhaps put an anti-racist, undoing racism component into the plan, because otherwise, I think, Talia, you said something to the fact that if we just continue investing in something that's wasn't created, or maybe Rosalind, you said that wasn't created to be equitable, wasn't created to be equality, whatever that would be in them, then that it's just investing more into it is not going to be the solution.
I was just gonna add that I think that in our essential drivers group, we keep coming back to this very same thing too, and feel like unless there's some kind of acknowledgement followed by systems change, so let's say if it's infrastructure, it's hard to imagine if we don't acknowledge that infrastructure has left some people behind, and we have a very specific plan for how the legislature is gonna make infrastructure decisions to spend money that includes people that have been left behind, and that makes sure we don't continue to do that, we're not going to be able to drive the big change that we're looking for. And I kind of think that that's happening in everyone's group when we hear people talking, that we have to acknowledge it, we have to own it, and then we have to very specifically outline plans for how we're going to use a different lens to make decisions going forward. Thanks, Tracy. Anybody else? Okay.
I guess I would also just say, that a part of it, Marcus, you're right. I mean, it's the will. Like, none of this is rocket science. And as smart as everybody is here in the room, none of these things are like terribly, like, no one's like, we're going to have the genie bottle and then like magic will happen or something. We're not proposing any of those things. But I think it's also about like, how do we create the will to make these changes, right? As long as there's a belief that if those folks do better, I am not going to, it keeps us right where we are, right? And I think that like, to whatever extent, and we can be in this roadmap, in the preamble, in the post credits, I don't care where. But I think we have to sort of address that issue because we're here, the systems work as they have been designed to. Right? And I think that there's some part of us that has to acknowledge that there's a whole lot of narrative about why and how that we also have to work on it. As important as it would be to fully fund childcare, and I believe that in my heart and soul and roots of my hair and all the things, there's also a whole bunch of narrative work around why that's important, why childcare isn't just women's work, and the childcare workers should get paid more. I mean, there's a lot of that piece that we also have to dismantle at the same time as we are proposing these policies or, practices or programs or all of the things, because otherwise we're just going to continue to get what we get. And I will say personally struggle with the inner cynic that's just like, how will we be different? How will this report be different and stand out? And how it can be actionable and move things forward. And I think we as a group have struggled with that too, like how we can do that. There's something about the narrative piece we've got to address, because if people had the will to change it, they would have done it already. They don't. And I just think there has to be something different. Thank you.
Just, extremely well said. Just to amplify that, what Julie said, what I'm kind of hearing is that maybe we're missing something right now in our structure. Like we got these 5 vision statements, we're working on all these issues. We have to do that work, right? We have to tackle all these issue areas. But maybe we need, preamble is probably too light of a word. We need something up top that essentially addresses that addresses that systemically, you've got to get to the core of some of these issues that have caused equity for so long in our state. And from that will lead 5 different sort of vision statements that we have to follow. Seems like we haven't done that as a group yet. We haven't kind of coalesced around that being our entree into the rest of this. And so maybe we follow with that as an action item from this meeting of considering what that might look like to encapsulate that foundational component that runs through all 5 of these things. Every group's considering equity, what they're doing, but what I'm hearing folks say here is that we haven't raised the volume on that in a way that maybe the report might food for thought for us to consider.
This is a good transition to our what is there one more? Okay. One more and then we'll transition to the flip charting activity.
So the question was, what did we hear today that we should integrate? And I guess I've just been sitting here pondering what Sandra talked about and specifically the page amendment. I read about it. I don't know a ton about it. I tend to be a little skeptical. Okay, so we declare everybody's going to get a quality education. Is that really going to do something? But she spoke pretty forcefully that it would. And oh, by the way, one of our council members, Neil, frozen Neil over here, is the co-author. I mean, shouldn't we hear about that? Shouldn't we maybe, I know our agendas are jammed or whatever, but would that be worth 30 or 40 minutes to get brief? What has this done in other states to impact results? And ultimately, should this group endorse it or just leave it and not talk about it? But if education is such a predicate of all these things getting done, and that's just sitting out there, and one of the speakers today talked to us about it, it just seems like we're kind of being negligent a little bit if we just sort of blow by and just go back to our 5 assignments.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, briefly, and then we'll.
Neil's gonna.
Neil first.
Yeah.
I don't know if my image is still frozen. I'd be happy to on another date, or better yet, the person for whom it's named after, Alan Page. I imagine that Justice Page would be happy to address the group.
And there's within our group, our subgroup, there's an education, there's a set of bullets, and quality education is called out specifically in there. And Steve and I were just talking at the break about how to merge those two, and I think we'd be happy to have Justice Page come and share some of that.
One more, Liz?
No, yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay.
It's your council. I'm just.
Jeff had just brought up in terms of what we should integrate. There was a comment made by Simon that, I don't know him, sorry, Secretary of State. I've been busy. He made a comment about pride. And I want to hold that for a minute about misplaced pride. And in Minnesota, we have some serious recession issues where we're seeing an increase in white nationalism and misplaced pride. I don't want to lose that in this conversation because it's so wonderful to be in this space together, but I do feel like that's part of anti-racist work. And then I'm really interested at the Blanton Foundation and what intermediaries look like once funding is distributed out. And so I've been visiting with the initiative foundations and looking at these maps, and our public system is not in alignment to take public dollars and work in synergy. And it's a significant like structural issue that will be, it's a tactic that really needs to be looked at. And I appreciated the comment about these art, the size of an art and culture and music spaces that are smaller, because in rural spaces that are 95 to 100% white, those are the only spaces where learning happens and where intercultural relationships are actualized, and that they're the critical like point of growth for intergenerational activities that capture K-12, grandma, and a child. And I just really appreciated whoever brought that to the table, that scalability is critical in some of these remote rural places. Thanks.
Okay, so what we're gonna do now is like that, this is the actual cross-pollination moment. So we're gonna do a pre-COVID thing and get up out of our chairs and go interact with some flip charts. So maybe we can do it like one table at a time so that we're not all overwhelming it. But I do want you all to read what everyone has written it for their, what does this look like, and kind of their scope strategies, and then interact with it. If you have a question, write it on a Post-it and put it next to where you have a question. If you see overlap, write this overlaps with other stuff. And then if, like Commissioner Grove was saying, we can put another flip chart out there. And if we want to start creating this preamble together when we're all together, that's in our purview. So, which I think it's missing, and we heard it today. So yeah, so maybe we'll start, and you all can like strategize around your individual tables, but maybe we'll start with you guys since you're closest. And just
spread them out.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, so yeah, we'll spread them out, but that's what we're doing. Go up, think about what questions you have, think about questions that are up on the screen. What?
I'll
we're
put
using
the content into the chat so that you can
Yes.
see what's on the flip chart.
Use the flip charts at your table, and there's more over by Nick and Jeff.
You want us to be up and walking around?
Yeah, get up, walk around, and like read your thing.
Anyway, and so one day I was.
So I look at the first.
Yeah.
Questions for all.
I then like every time you wear something. It's sure that's her, but I then finally deserve something else.
All can say, yeah, there's not a. I see Holland.
That's how we have.
Well, maybe I'm looking.
Yeah, so
Oh, that's our strategies. Yeah,
these are like their metrics. Yeah, they're Thank you so much. What they're measuring.
Yeah.
Measuring increasing equity, measure back to better economic metric. Like the metrics at the end, like how that's like.
So, when we're trying to give feedback, what? I know that. I'm trying in the other one too, so, not that that's obviously me.
Shimmy, you, this is my first moment.
Oh, no, that's what I'm saying. It's just like, it's, yeah.
I can use that marker and I can still say how. It says you're gonna support the strategies.
Yeah,
But how?
you can do, yes.
So we're gonna write this.
You can write down the part, you can write straight up there. Yeah, this is great.
Oh, yeah, I'm on the verge of figuring out.
Neil had to hop and Brett is leaving imminently. So I might stop screen sharing actually.
I meant to send you a note.
It's not the last one of those big opportunities. I'm not sure when I did it, I realized quite as much. Oh, bang, yes, 7 awards, which is like, oh man, it's been a jolt, but. And it's all go very fast, and yeah. To be out by May 25th, I mean, right, 8 of us on one side, on me, 10 on the other, and whoever wins is the win, and so we'll see, but I just. It's, I mean, you just start getting, there's. Basis kind of exposed a lot. I mean, we just have, financial disclosure of every single thing we have, whatever, it's just, oh my God, I really never stop to do that, but, no, it's really quite. Yes. No, but I didn't do the overall job, because some things good, so that. I really appreciate it. Gotta be fantastic. That's my favorite part. My favorite part, the part of calling, calling money and that kind of stuff. That's not my favorite part, but going.
Thanks, Eric.
Bigger questions of like, yeah. Unless you're saying that this person is paying the program, come back to them.
All right, everybody, if you want to make your way back to your table, we will have a conversation and then close out for the day.
Thank you. They are really hard. Which is why I had to call Amy to do the front of the room stuff, because I was like, I can't do both of them.
I ain't standing unless they're me.
All right, so what I'm gonna do is go around and share out what all of you came up with. And then if anybody has any comments that you'd like to make about each particular topic, you're welcome to do that. Not a ton of time for that, but we'll spend about 5 minutes on each of the subcommittees areas. So starting with health equity, what this looks like, we've got a number of ideas or questions or comments up here. Is there a public safety component? Overlap with essential drivers? Include spiritual health that includes hope, belonging, connection. Where does mental health fit in? Could we create clear system of rights for patients? Never pay X% of income in health costs. Sounds nice. We shift from health insurance driven model to wellness. High cost of healthcare for many workers, cost burden. And then under the strategies, or what our strategies will address, we have meet people where they are. Access to healthy spaces are culturally inclusive. True of many sectors. And in schools, invest in support professionals in addition to teachers. Yeah, a huge component of that. Any comments, any other ideas or different energies that we should bring up for the health equity topic?
For me, maybe the health equity people want to respond to their feedback.
Comments or responses, anything?
You know, I didn't put it up there, but I just say, easy. I didn't put it up there, and it's not like this is going as far as we should go, but like, in just basic form, I think everybody who is not an adult should have healthcare. That's gonna be a question. We can talk about where to go from there, but anybody who's not, an adult should not have to be worried about trying to pay for healthcare.
Thanks, Joe. Anyone else? Comments, questions, other thoughts on health equity? I'll just note this. It looks like we have an overall tone and preamble flip chart. And up here we have active anti-racist language, narrative, actions, and strategies. We need to listen to the data, to the truth, not trying to throw a Molotov cocktail. Yeah, that's a good quote from today. Focus on results, not just good intentions. Any comments about that, about the preamble flip chart? Okay, let's talk about essential drivers. In the what this looks like area, we have education goes beyond the school year, invest in nonprofits, and free transit, free broadband, public utilities. And in strategies, or what our strategies will address, we have not just housing, but homeownership to grow generational wealth. What will attract the best teachers? Overlaps with business supports, education needs clarity, i.e. STEM, and page amendment, ? Any comments, gaps, energies, anything that you want to bring up?
And maybe oh yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Hartstead, but the more broadly, where education is living in multiple places, and like Jeff said earlier, maybe that's okay, but any more additional thoughts on that would be great.
I just want to second the motion of bringing Alan Page in if we can.
I wrote that and over on the business one as well, the education component, and we just need to, and maybe it's you all at a leadership level, if you can help those of us that are in the working groups know where our lane is. I mean, if we think about it as a value stream and where we're playing through the focus on STEM as a workforce initiative to train for next generation jobs, but it residing in business supports is about workforce versus is it education and essential drivers about what's happening? And we've got STEM in 3 places. Is it more important that it's in one of them versus all 3 of them? And if you guys can help us, help you be impactful, but not lose sight of where those themes then are important would be helpful.
I mean, would it be, just to react to that, because I think it's important. I mean, I think it would be good to let groups follow their curiosities to some extent and but then just do a good job of merging it at the end. I feel like we need another meeting like this kind of before we do the final report where you actually see on the link, here's what we came up with, and then we merge it to your point. Unless there's massive overlap that the team sees after today that we can do some quick fixes. Does that work? Yeah.
You don't want to lose the nuance of the ideas at this point, right? Any other comments or questions, energies, synergies, gaps that you'd like to pull up for the essential drivers topic?
It would be good, sorry. No, and I were talking, just because the page room has come a lot, it'd be good to hear from, I don't know, Denise Specht or somebody who doesn't like the page room, just to understand for us as a group, what, where the debate is. So as we think about that, maybe we pull together both sides of that.
I'm not speaking for Neil, but because he can't speak, he also has been talking about it in the group, and I think he's very clear about who opposes this, and there are groups that oppose it, and so I think hearing from those subsectors just to understand that would be useful.
I'll get any other comments about the essential drivers topic.
Not sure where in this we start to have the tactics pulled together, but the fiscal policies behind these need to be like reformula equalization to be factored in. So that part of this jobs. We're gonna do that. That's amazing.
No, we said we're gonna do it, but we know it's important.
I'm just saying, I hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
Paul's taking that one on himself, he said.
All right, let's take a look at what we came up with over here, thriving communities. In the what this looks like, we have welcoming communities equals thriving communities. Shift from I'm good, therefore to we're good. Collective narrative. Appreciate differences across the state. Differences don't equal a problem to solve. Can we better understand how legacy amendment is not working? And then in our strategies, we have outdoor rec map investments. Who doesn't have the outdoor rec they want or need? And, oh, unbiased. Okay, I can read. Sorry. Unbiased media, strong in metro, struggling elsewhere. Thriving communities feel ownership in their futures. Be curious, per Sandra Samuels. How to make more people want to be curious. We need clear public safety strategies and an equitable approach to safety, or we won't get to thrive at all. And we are in a time where the rights of some are being threatened. We can't have this in Minnesota. So comments about synergies, gaps, energies. We'll make my way to the next one.
So the safety conversation obviously is a huge kind of question out there, and I don't know where that is sitting, or if we have tackled that in any way, or if we have the capacity to tackle it. But it's a big deal, and when you really breakdown. I mean, the governor last night said, right, yeah, we need to talk about safety, but we need to talk about what's behind, creating those safety situations to begin with, right? The lack of investment, the lack of belonging. So I think it's a big topic and it's sitting out there and I don't know what to do with it. So I'm just putting that on the table.
Not the same thing.
Yeah. Joe, you want to respond?
Well, I mean, I'll probably not very helpful. We talked about that, in the same capacity that public safety is not just law enforcement or first responder. And how to address that in a way that was, maybe careful isn't the right word, but that is respectful of the different positions of public safety and not just coming at it from like a law enforcement perspective. We talked about having Chief Arredondo as one of our speakers, but then we started looking at it from a different level and we started saying, okay, what creates a safe environment? Instead of looking at it from the law enforcement side of it, what creates a safe environment? And it's a lot of these things that a thriving community does that creates a safe environment, whether it's access to education, making sure that there's access to childcare, and all of those things that if families can provide and a unit can be there, a family unit is there to support it. Not that public safety like solves itself, but that becomes less of a reactionary law enforcement type perspective instead of like, how do we proactively address public safety from the things that we can do besides just, open checkbook for law enforcement, I think is the way that we decide kind of how to look at that. So
We are doing in our group we're doing a meeting with Harrington, a person who runs Little Lift Protectors, which is like a community public safety effort, and then a chief of a Greater Minnesota Police Department, I think next week. So we're tackling it, but it is a big issue. We've been thinking a lot about what altitude do we come in at there. So we're probably gonna want some guidance from the group after we have that meeting, but we'll circle back.
I'm just thinking about this, because I know that a couple weeks ago I was in an event at Deed about, second chance workers, and this kind of came up and made me think about this a lot. But I think that when we talk about public safety, there's a part of public safety that is, of course, external to me as a human being, right? Maybe there's something out there, someone who has a weapon or something that I don't have. But part of my safety and my feeling of safety as a human being is internal to me. And I think we have to consider both sides of it, because sometimes people express a feeling of not being safe, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with an external force. It's more of a lack of knowledge or understanding. And I would use second chance workers. One of the things that came up in that conversation was that, HR people said, well, sometimes women feel unsafe if their employer's going to hire somebody that has a felony conviction. But they don't distinguish whether or not the felony conviction has anything to do with women or a reason to be afraid. It could be a felony DUI conviction. Has absolutely nothing to do with someone's gender. And so I just think we should keep that in mind as we think about public safety, that we got to get that sorted out. So.
about that. That was to make really good stuff.
And I want to offer the idea of like a collective care model too, that is very prevalent within communities for public safety and how we create safety, a sense of safety in our communities. And then when I just think of the title, thriving communities, I also think about abundance. And I think we often think about things from a lens of scarcity. And so, so I would encourage within the whole project, within the work, what we're doing more than a project, but the roadmap and thriving communities to approach it from a lens of abundance. And I just think about like transit and the fact that people, pay $2.25 for transit, and it doesn't, why, right? Because it doesn't actually pay for the cost of transit. It's hugely subsidized. So, why can't, and during COVID, we did have free transit, and other cities are looking to move towards that. So again, why do we do certain things? And can we look at it from a place of abundance and figure out how to make things available to people rather than restrictive?
Thank you. I love that we're doing the shift from a scarcity mindset to a mindset of abundance. and also shifting from judgment to curiosity. Very exciting. I'm going to bring us over to the business supports area so we can wrap up on time, and then we'll finish with holistic supports. But what we have under what this looks like, we effectively retain businesses through stages. Also, when transitions and ownership happen, silver tsunami. Big question of how do we do it across both flip charts. And then under our strategies, we have incentives for businesses that employ and retain BIPOC staff. Focus on those already doing it. Overlap with holistic support, need a value system, need value stream clarity. Create partnerships that develop wraparound support for employees, government and nonprofit, et cetera, transportation, housing, childcare. What can Minnesota expect from large businesses so it's not extractive in an extractive relationship? Community benefits. Are nonprofits included in conversations about businesses? We are 14% of the Minnesota economy. So any comments about, okay, we saw that. Any comments about synergies, gaps, where there may be energies for the business supports topic? I'll make my way over to the holistic support group. What this looks like, we have pay transparency can help with this, amplifying what the workforce shortage with, I'm not sure what that said, but amplifying what the workforce and shortage, something around that. Reminder to not forget nonprofits as they are businesses. Again, 14% of the Minnesota economy. You will be tested on that later. In the strategies, we have how does this address school, K through 12, resources for mental health, overlap with business supports, ditto, need to figure out our lanes, focus for both. You've all kind of talked about that already. Businesses, business aftermaths, micro businesses, this needs intentional focus. Define BIPOC businesses owned, led by, within, or serving BIPOC communities. What specific supports would small businesses want to better support employees? Any comments about synergies, gaps, energies when it comes to the holistic support? All right, I'm going to walk this microphone over to Paul to close us out then.
Thank you. Well, thanks, everybody. I had a great session today and good to be in the room and have energy and connection, I think, in a fundamentally different way. Great panelists and good discussion and good to see kind of all the work going on here. I just was jotting down here, you know, this question about lack of political will, lack of scale, lack of innovation. So on May 9th, our group, the Essential Drivers Group, is programming for this group. And we've been really fixated on those three questions. And so we're going to frame the panel that we're bringing to you all around how do we create will? How do we push past incremental solutions? How do we create change at scale? And so we've got three kind of unique, I think, thinkers, Tim Penny, former congressman, Eric Jolly from St. Paul, Minnesota Community Foundation, and Mai Kao Hong, now at St. Thomas, formerly at Wilder. Just folks who have been in a number of different arenas who we think can push our thinking. But the whole conversation will be about how do you move to scale? How do we push through, right, the impasse? How do we push through the incremental solutions, which kind of sort of work, right, but haven't moved the needles? And as a matter of fact, if you listen to our panel today, we seem to have actually lost ground. And so that's going to be the gist of that next panel when we come back together on the 9th. I think we're going to be virtual again on the 9th.
Yeah, we'll do one more hybrid meeting at the end of June, but we're going to be virtual for.
Yep, and then it seems, obviously, the education, we'll have conversation with staff on the education conversation, and perhaps we can bring Justice Page in, and I think maybe the safety conversation needs additional judging in the conversation here in just a few minutes. I think that might make a lot of sense as well. So huge thank you for taking the time today. Long meeting, but I think really good conversation. Jeff, any final words? Yeah, thanks, you.
We're so hard, you guys. So mad snaps to be back and showing that together.
All right. Anything else? We're done. Drive safely.